Hey guys, Chris Dudek here. Let's talk equipment. I'm gonna go over 3 areas: rackets, strings, and balls. So when it comes to rackets, the first thing I would like you to do is try to give yourself a rating between 1 and 10. And that's not really how well you play, although that is a factor. It has a little bit more to do with your strength, how long your swing is, how hard you hit, and then kind of skill level in there. Basically, you take that rating from 1 to 10, 1 being a pro, 10 being a beginner, and you kind of find yourself in your range there, and that will determine what kind of racket you should purchase. When it comes to rackets, there's a couple different things that determine how powerful or how much control it has. One can be how big the face is, how wide the beam is, and also the weight distribution. Is it more head light or more head heavy? You're gonna find that the lighter rackets tend to have a bigger face, a wider beam, and are a little bit more head heavy. The reason is that those 3 things make the racket have a bigger sweet spot, more trampoline effect, easier to get the racket through, so it's gonna create more power. Whereas a heavier racket is gonna be more head light, so the weight's gonna be more in the handle. You're gonna have a little bit smaller of a beam and a smaller racket face, and what that does is give you more control. It's a smaller sweet spot, but when you hit it, it usually goes where you want it to go. Now, one easy way to be able to tell whether the racket is good for you or in your right range is just based off of the weight, because the weight kind of tells a lot about the racket. So weights of rackets typically go from 9 ounces the lowest to 11.5 would be the highest. The average usually around 10 ounces. So if you find yourself, if you think you're about a 5, then you'd want to use something around the 10 ounces. So great company like Head, their new gravity racket here, they go from the Pro 11.1 to Mid Plus 10.4, 10.1, 9.9, all the way down to 9.5. So if you were categorize yourself as like a 7 or 8, you're probably going to be using the light one. A lot of the players, they end up being somewhere, 2, 3, 4, maybe a 5 or a 6. So this would be for a 2 or 3, the Mid Plus. The S would be for 4 or 5, maybe 6, and this would be for like a 6 or 7, the Mid Plus Light. So that's basically what you want to do when you're looking for a racket, is try to get a racket that's around the correct weight area based on your rating, and then you can get plenty of different rackets that are all weighted. Let's say you are a 2 or 3, so you get one that's around the 10.5 ounce range. Get 5, 6, 7 different rackets at that range, and then they'll all have a little bit more power, control, feel, spin, but just get one that's in your range. Next, we're going to talk about strings. Strings, there's 4 different kinds of strings. There is your basic synthetic gut, there's a multi-filament string, there's polyester string, and then there's natural gut. Natural gut, it feels really good, breaks rather quickly, and is extremely expensive. I personally don't think it's worth the money, but if you feel like you really want the best feeling string out there and you don't care about cost, then it's something that you might want to consider. Overall, I don't really talk about it that much. The other string that I don't talk about very much is a synthetic gut. It's your basic string. It's cheaper, but it doesn't feel very good, and it only costs a little bit more to get a higher quality string, so I don't even really recommend doing something like that. Now you basically have your 2 basic strings. Your basic strings would be your multi-filament and your polyester. So with the multi-filament strings, those are gonna feel the best. They're gonna break a little bit quicker, but they're gonna feel really good. So usually the players who are anywhere between, let's say, a 4 and a 10 on the rating system, you typically use a multi-filament. Head makes a few of them: Reflex, Velocity, FXP, a couple other ones. Those are gonna feel really good. One other part of that is you can adjust based off of the gauge. So string gauges go from 15 to 18 typically, but most of them are either 16 gauge or 17 gauge. 17 gauge being thinner, but feeling a little bit better. 16 gauge being a little bit thicker, but doesn't break quite as quickly. So if you really want a really good feeling string, go with the multi-filament. That's 17 gauge. If you're breaking a little bit quickly, maybe go to the 16 gauge. Now, if you're breaking strings even more, that's when you go into the polyester. And basically, if you're doing that, you're usually a 1, 2, or 3 player, maybe a 4. And within the polyesters, there's ones like the Hawk, which are a lot more durable, but maybe don't feel quite as great. And then, or like a Lynx, which is a lot softer, feels a lot better, but might break a little bit quicker. So there's different levels in that. Lastly, some people kind of want to try to get the feel of the multifilament, but want a little bit more durability like the polyester. So you can do a hybrid. You could take one of the multifilaments and half of a multifilament and half of a polyester and put them together. Head does one called Primal that does it for you, but you can also pick any two and do that. Typically, you're going to put the polyester on the main strings because that's the one that breaks the most, and the multifilament on the cross strings. Lastly, when it comes to strings, tension-wise, the higher you go on tension, the more control you're going to get. The lower you go on tension, you're going to get more power. Also, if you're struggling with a little bit of arm issue, you might want to go lower in tension. It's a little bit easier on the arm. Lastly, but definitely not least, is the ball. One of my pet peeves is when I see people that are willing to spend the money on getting quality rackets or quality strings or take lessons or belong to a club, which can all cost a lot of money, but then they'll go cheap on the balls. And to get a higher quality ball, it's really not that much more expensive. So you basically have, Penn makes, 2 really good quality balls. They're Pro Penn and Penn Tour, very, very good balls. And then they also have their generic Penn ball, which you'll find at like a Costco or Walmart or whatnot. And I find a lot of people playing with this. But the difference between this and a Pro Penn ball is the felt is 1,000 times better. When you first open up the can and you play with it, you're probably not going to notice quite a difference right off the first bounce, but after one set you'll notice a significant difference, again with the felt either fuzzing up or wearing down, the color of the felt, it gets very dull, and then also the bounce of the ball, these die a lot quicker than the Pro Penn. So for me, to spend the extra $1.50 to get a high quality ball is very, very important, opposed to just going the cheaper route and getting these. I think you'll notice a big difference. So to recap, basically first start off by giving yourself some sort of rating between 1 and 10. Again, 10 being stronger, 10 being weaker, 1 being stronger, 10 being weaker. Not necessarily in level, but just overall strength and a little bit of level in between there. And then find the right racket around the right weight, and then put the right strings, and you'll have the best combination there possible. That was a quick overview of all the different equipments. There's a lot more detail to go over, so if you have any questions, feel free to message me and I'll answer your questions. All right guys, give it a shot. Thanks for listening.